welcome to Molden and Schmidt, our new podcast. I run a company called Emissions Analytics. We care about the environmental impact of vehicles, tailpipe, all sorts, however we affect the environment. With me, I've got Oliver Schmidt. Oliver, please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Oliver Schmidt. Even I don't want to admit it to myself. Some people would call me a veteran of the automotive industry by now. I have been working for more than 20 years within the Volkswagen development department and various other departments. Most people know me from my involvement in the Volkswagen diesel scandal and the following prison sentence in the US. I guess we will come to more details later.
We will certainly do that. There's so many topics in the world of cars and how they affect the environment, and that's what we're going to tackle on each episode. But people might wonder, why have we come together? We were originally, I guess, on the opposite sides of the table in this matter. We were testing lots of things and showing how bad diesel was. You were on the side of possibly the biggest car company in the world. How was it from your side when I was chasing after you?
No, you weren't chasing after me. You lured me into a hotel room. That was the first time we met. We met back, I think it was 2013 or 12. We met in Detroit in the Marriott in the Ranson. And I remember I got this invite from one of the major car magazines. I can't remember which one it was. I got this invite to come to this secret hotel room and not to talk to people on my way in and out. Even if I see other people that I know, don't talk to them. So I went in there, and then that's where I met you. And you described basically your business model to us. And you showed us what you were planning to do. That you were planning to do real driving emissions in the US, but that time with the focus of fuel consumption. That's when the first time we met.
You're right. It probably, in my mind, wasn't quite as clandestine as you make it sound, but there we go. We'll go with that. And interestingly, what we were showing, the thing which I think surprised both of us, we were showing how beautifully fuel efficient the latest Volkswagen diesel was. Now that sounded like good news on paper. But tell me, why was good fuel economy actually an indication of something not quite so good?
I guess these are details of the whole defeat device that we might not go into today. But if you look at any diesel, it's not just Volkswagen, it's any diesel. If you look at diesel, you can always make a choice between nitrous oxides emission and fuel consumption. If you have good fuel consumption, you have higher nitrous oxide emission. If you have bad fuel consumption, you have low nitrous oxide emissions. And this is basically how this all is related. It's nothing to do with specific Volkswagen or any manufacturer. It's just the nature of a diesel engine.
And that really, in short, is the story of how we stumbled into this and first got to know each other. Because what we were interested in was real-world consumer experience, why their MPG in reality was often worse than advertised. So we started testing hundreds of vehicles in the United States, in Europe. What we didn't know when we started was that link with these diesel NOx emissions, which opened the gate to dieselgate. But I think we should step back before we go on to say a little bit more about us personally and how we come to this in terms of our backgrounds and qualifications. I guess I see myself primarily as an economist. And as part of economics, there's the notion of market failure, which is where pollution is created by someone who doesn't have to pay the consequences. So when you're driving around, out comes all this pollution from the exhaust, and you can dump it into the environment for free. That's essentially the problem of pollution from cars. And as an economist, I was interested in how to solve it through measuring it, possibly taxing it, possibly regulating it. That's how I got to this. I'm no automotive engineer, an economist, but you're an engineer. Tell me more about your background.
Basically, you're right. I studied mechanical engineering at the university in Hanover, and I started working with Volkswagen in 1997, and I worked my way all the way through the ranks of this company. So I started as a designer. I designed crankshafts and auxiliary belt drives for the W engines, and then progressed becoming a senior engineer. I even was working in England for 1.5 years for Bentley. Then I moved to the US for the first time in a marketing project. I moved back to Germany. I spent 3 years in production, in powertrain production. From there on, I founded a new department called Product Management Powertrain. So we wrote our own papers for the board to present new strategies on engines that hopefully pollute less than the ones before and consume less fuel. And then I went back to the US and became the head of the engineering and environmental office. That's actually where we met. And then came back to Germany again and worked for Volkswagen until my incarceration. So, but what you said about the pollution, it's not only about cars. This is always basically there is this famous saying, we just borrow the world from our children. So I think that sums it up what you try to describe.
Exactly. And in a way, what we're going to deal with over the various episodes of this podcast is all the different ways that we are borrowing the future from our children, and actually how maybe we can strike some new, better intergenerational bargain. But let's move on the story just briefly in terms of our background. So we had that first meeting where we were launching our MPG product, and it was with a magazine called Motor Trend in the US.
Okay.
But then a little time passed. When was the first time you had an inkling that there was going to be a big crisis about the NOx pollutant emissions?
Yeah, it was basically after the study of the University of West Virginia was published. At this time, I personally didn't know what was going on. I was not on the team that was working on it. I was only the spokesperson in the US that made first contact with those people, but then it got forwarded to internal working groups I was not part with. But then the next time I met you, this was not such a pleasant meeting, if I remember correctly. You did, after Volkswagen came up with a fix for the diesel emissions, you made a test for our biggest German magazine, Automotor Sport, and you tested Volkswagen Amarok before and after the Flash, and you basically came to the conclusion that you didn't see any big difference there. And that's when people asked me, who knows this mold? Or it was basically asked in the company, what's this company that's doing all these tests? What are they doing there? Do they know what they are doing? Who knows this company? And I said, I remember, I met this guy in this hotel room. So I got the task to call you and invite you to this famous Stuttgart meeting. Maybe I leave it to you to sum up this meeting.
I do remember a rather urgent phone call from you. I think you were in the process of flying in a private jet to Brize Norton or some other private airport in the UK to try and diffuse, to put out fires after dieselgate. But you're quite right. The very first vehicle that Volkswagen fixed was the Amarok pickup truck. So we got hold of one straight away with Automotor and Sport in Stuttgart, and we found virtually no difference. And this was obviously reported with great enthusiasm by the journalists of the magazine, and came at an incredibly sensitive time in this. And I remember that meeting very well. It was 2 people from our company, from Emissions Analytics, and I think about 11, if I remember rightly. Maybe it was only 9, but it was a lot of you all around the table, grilling us in German, largely for most of the day, putting up chart after chart of figures, and we ended the day largely at a standoff. What it turned out to be, by my recollection, was that the fix had not been tested in real world conditions. And so it might have been a great fix in the lab, but it didn't do much in real world conditions. And that meant that what we'd found stood true. And interestingly, it was a microcosm of the whole business of these vehicles all around the world were meeting some official certification test, but they were doing something completely different in the real world. And if there's one thing that got me into this in the first place, it was that. So that one very, very uncomfortable day stood for a lot of what we were trying to do. But how did the Volkswagen executives walk away from that day? What was were they cursing us, or what did they recognize something in what we were saying?
No, actually, do you remember still what happened afterwards? When you came to Wolfsburg and we had this comparison tests between your technology and the Volkswagen technology, basically they walked away and said it can't be true what he measured. And then we came to Wolfsburg and we had this comparison test. We had two identical cars, one equipped with your technology and the other one equipped with the Volkswagen technology. And I guess I leave it again to you to tell what happened there, because I might not be allowed to.
Well, yes, there was a lot of very serious looking faces that day. All I remember is the last sentence I think that was uttered on that day, which was, "These guys know what they're doing." And I took that
Yeah,
away, and I slept very well that night. That was
yeah,
my abiding recollection, that we were able to measure those NOx emissions in real world condition with a very good level of accuracy. I think slightly better accuracy than the Volkswagen team, but it did show that you were able to measure these things and that there were genuine issues in real world conditions
yeah.
with these high NOx emissions. So that was a after a tough day in Stuttgart, that was a high point.
Yeah. So do you credit yourself with the implementation of real driving emission factors in the Euro 6 and 7? Do you think your studies have been part of this?
Oh, definitely part of it. I would not claim that we were uniquely responsible. And what these are, what was introduced very rapidly after Dieselgate was an on-road verification of all the official certification numbers, which was long overdue. What was interesting, though, is the European Commission had been developing these back since at least, I think, 2011. And this was
Hmm.
moving very, very slowly with very little urgency until Dieselgate happened in 2015. And then suddenly it was accelerated rapidly. So I would lay claim to some responsibility for the acceleration in that
Okay.
and ultimate introduction around 2018. Had it not been for Dieselgate and us showing how every diesel vehicle in Europe was over emitting, I don't think that would have happened so quickly or so strictly. I don't know. Would you agree with that, or?
Yeah, as I said in the beginning, I was not in Europe from the beginning of 2017, so I couldn't follow exactly what happened here. That's why I ask you how you see your role in there. The only thing I remember is when we bought your studies. You mentioned all the tests that you did in the UK and in the US. And in the UK, you did a test where you measured NOx emission of all manufacturers on the road. And this is a study that showed that of all 17 brands you tested, none of the brands actually met the lab results. And that there were companies worse than Volkswagen and companies better than Volkswagen. Volkswagen, if I remember correctly, was in the median of these results. And that's what I remember of this. But I never followed the European regulations that close. I was, as I said, I was for 3 years in the US. I know more about Lev 3, Tier 3, Lev 4, Tier 4 than I do know about Euro 6 and 7.
And what you say is absolutely right. We found, not a single European diesel met the limit in real world driving. And in fact, on average, they were 4 or 5 times the official limit. That is why, in my opinion, Dieselgate has become such a scandal. It's actually, in my view, less so that Volkswagen broke the law in America. That was only 500,000 cars. What is the bigger
Yeah.
scandal is that every vehicle in Europe and to a large
Hmm.
extent Asia as well were 4 or 5 times the limit. And even now, and we're now almost 9 years after Dieselgate, there's not been many clear legal determinations in Europe. It's grinding through
Yeah.
the courts here
Yeah. I know.
to
I
say
know.
whether that 4 or 5 times the limit is actually illegal.
Yeah.
So that's the
Yeah.
European situation. But back to America and your experience of this. So how did it then pan out for you after those meetings in Stuttgart and then trajectory of your life from there.
Yeah, I just want to step back one step to what you just said. I think the American reaction to measuring the Volkswagen helped a lot in Europe, because in the US the Volkswagen were 35 times over the limit. And this sounds now huge and tremendous and everything, but you always have to remember that the American limit was 6 times lower than the European limit at this time. We had 100 milligrams of NOx per kilometer in Europe, and we had 31 milligrams per kilometer in the US. So there's already a factor of 6 in there. And now if you take the 5 you mentioned times the 6 that's in the legal limit, you have 30. So all cars were basically as bad as the Volkswagen that got measured in the US. So it's nothing specific about those cars. You're totally right there. So yeah, my story, what happened to me afterwards? I got arrested and thrown in jail. That's what happened to me. Once I came back from the US, I started a new job here in Germany, and then got asked to help out in the negotiation with the American government, and made the mistake to agree to do so, and didn't know that I'm committing a crime, meeting a government official, not telling everything I know. So the meeting was only scheduled for 90 minutes. If I would have told everything I know, even necessary or not necessary, it would have been much longer. And I wasn't aware of this legal situation. I wasn't aware that the law between the US and a bit the UK is totally different than the European law we have here. The difference between common law and practice law. So that I wasn't aware of this.
And so, after spending some time in jail, what are you doing now? And what brought you to the table and doing a podcast like this? What do you see personally that we might try and achieve through these discussions?
So the one thing that I want to promote first is I want to warn young engineers of being aware what they do. So I'm giving speeches at local universities here, always telling about my story, what happened to me, and I'm always trying to warn them, if you are in doubt about what you do, don't do it. So this is the one thing. And then the other thing is, I think the topic of our podcast here is to bring a bit of rationality into the whole topic. It's like this discussion, electric vehicle or not electric vehicle. You can only be pro or against it. There is no median way described. If you are pro electric vehicle, you have the haters on the e-fuel side. If you are pro e-fuels, you have the haters on the electric vehicle side. So I think this should be one of the tasks of our podcast, to bring some common ground here and really show facts and numbers on which this can be judged.
I think that's will be a really important part of what we do, and I personally receive every day, the both sides of this very divided discussion, and it does not help in terms of getting to an end answer. My motivation, what I would like out of this, is to move forward, like you, based on facts and evidence, a way of making motoring, mobility consistent without wrecking the planet. How do we? It would be terribly easy to stop everyone traveling around, but it's much harder to allow everyone to travel around, but in a way that we don't put out too much pollution, we don't heat the atmosphere. So the sorts of things that we're going to be talking about, I think, we will be talking about how good are battery electric vehicles? How much CO2 is embedded in the upstream when you make the battery? How long do these batteries last? The current one that I get so much correspondence about is tire emissions. Vehicles are getting heavier and heavier. How bad a problem are tire emissions? And are EVs the worst offenders? We will tackle this particular question head on. There's all sorts of other things. Plastics that are incorporated in vehicles give off lots of exotic chemicals that people don't really know and are not regulated. We will look at that as well. So I think we would be able to talk for many, many episodes on the complexity of the modern vehicle, and we'll try and unpick that, but in a way that we can understand, and that we can possibly say to policymakers what you can sensibly do. because after all, this isn't meant to be esoteric. It wants to actually put together some practical understanding and practical policies as well.
Yeah.
So that's why I really look forward to this series with you. And I
Okay.
guess I'll sign off there. But would you like to say
Yeah.
any last words for this introductory episode?
The famous last words. I think I just do it with the words of a famous British motor journalist. And on this bombshell, we are going to end this episode.
And so we will. Oliver, thank you very much. And
Thank
we
you,
will
Nick.
look forward to the episode. Thank you very much.
Thank you.